We got hit with the first wave when the economy was better than it ever was before. So it came at a time when everything was just great. This second wave could come at a time where everything royally sucks. Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So we got a lot to talk about today. Where do we start? Okay, so I don't have a PhD, I don't have a master's degree. I do have an honors degree in psychology. I did the graduate record examination. I scored a perfect 100, which is in the top 1 percentile of the population. I also did the math portion and the language portion. I didn't fare as well on those, really middle of the road on those, but in terms of analytical capability, my analytical ability far exceeds my ability to articulate myself. So that's why you get a lot of jump cuts in these videos, because oftentimes my thoughts are much faster than my lexicon will permit. The reason why I bring this up is because we're going to be talking about appeals to authority and credibility today when we look at some of these statistics. We're going to be talking about a lot of misinformation that is going on right now. We're going to talk about the impending market crash. I believe that we've just turned a corner and it's going to start going down in a rapid way. We're going to talk about the political divide. We're going to be talking about everything. So let's just put it all on the table right now. Before I dive in here, I want to say, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that I have integrity when it comes to speaking truth to power. I've done many videos where I'm critical of the status quo, critical of the establishment, where I challenge the prevailing mainstream views. Watch the Pokemon Apocalypse or, the Offgrid Outsider. If you go back through my videos, you'll find countless times where I challenge, the conventional way of viewing things. So if any of you think I'm some kind of shill, it's flattering. It's like telling somebody who works out, who isn't on steroids, that they're on steroids. It's flattering that you think I have that kind of power. I just don't, unfortunately. I wish I did. I'm just right down here with the rest of us. You'll see me in the coffee shop, wave, say hello, whatever. Just don't look at me all creepy, because I sometimes forget that I'm a YouTuber and I'm like, why the hell is that guy looking at me? Anyways, let's talk about this idea that this is a plandemic, okay? And that this was all planned to take away your rights. Number one, go watch my video, 33 ways that they're spying on you, okay? They know everything about us already. They know when you're going to take a crap. They know when you're going to go to bed. They know what you're going to look at on the internet next. All because of these algorithms. The same algorithms that know what you're going to be interested in watching next. Those are perfectly dialed in. They have algorithms for everything. The NSA, between the NSA and the whatever's left of the Patriot Act and God knows what, they can just do what they want anyway. So this idea that they are really going to stand to gain much more power from this, there really isn't enough motive there. There really isn't enough for them to benefit from that. I'll tell you what they lose though. They lose 26 million people paying taxes for months and months on end, and above and beyond that, having to give those people back money. So we're talking about trillions of dollars. Remember, the government runs on taxation, to tax you, to get your labor. The word labor really is the same as the word tax. You had a taxing day today, So the whole point of taxing someone is to, basically take some of the products of their labor to, empower you. So that is their main mechanism of achieving power. Even if there was something with Big Pharma and the FDA, it would never be enough to exceed the amount of money that they're losing from having all of these people out of work and not paying taxes. So keep that in mind at all times. This is a very real situation. It's a real threat. All of this stuff about what was that thing called Exercise 201 where, they were planning for this. Look, people have been predicting the pandemic for years, decades. I mean, I've predicted it. Go back to some of my first videos on this channel. I said one of the most likely scenarios is going to be a pandemic. I mean, everybody was predicting a pandemic. You didn't have to be Nostradamus to do that. But of course, now you have all of these people up on their high horse saying that they predicted it. Well, everybody predicted it, man. Anyone with half a brain anyways. What I think is happening right now is that they're doing whatever they can to keep the phony economy propped up. That's what they're trying to do, okay? Because they want to get people back to work, and understandably so. And I totally advocate for a responsible back to work policy. Not that my opinion really matters. I think that, we need to do something, or else it's going to be, obviously this solution is going to be worse than the problem potentially. Now that's debatable too, because if you overwhelm the healthcare system, and that could have a chain reaction into other things that we haven't even foreseen yet. But I do think we got to get the economy going again. But I think that they're doing it in a way which is somewhat fraudulent. Now, I do think we're turning a corner with this phony bull run that we've seen here. The market crashed in, late March, and it was kind of on the up and up throughout April. But I think it's finally plateaued here. The reason why I say that, a lot of the big tech companies who actually had earnings in the first quarter, their stocks actually went down after the trading days, after they reported those earnings. So for me, that's a sign that the speculation bubble is bursting, and that things are starting to become more in line with reality, because they know this is going to be a rough quarter. And like I've said for the last few weeks, they're just pumping it up, getting one last hoorah. They're going to leave the little guy with the bag in his hand wondering what the hell happened once again. There's just such an unfounded optimism with the markets right now. There's no way, shape, or form that you can say that a 20% unemployment rate is going to somehow be able to sustain where the market is at. Never mind, make it go up even more. I mean, even if they did send people back to work and they opened up again, you're going to have airplanes that are only flying a certain amount of people. There's only going to be a certain amount of people allowed in restaurants, allowed in stadiums. And indeed, there's going to be new businesses that prop up, but that's going to take months, if not years, for those new things to start to emerge. So, I don't know. And then on top of that, of course, you're going to have the virus, which is going to continue to spread. And I don't even know if they're going to bother locking it down in the fall again, because I think if they do that, then it's going to really go into the depression realm of things. You can only print money or sell bonds or whatever you want to call it. They're making all these IOUs to the future, this generational spending that the Tea Party was protesting in 2009. I'm surprised that they're not really out protesting yet again, because all they're doing is kicking the can down the road. And you can make that argument that, well, they don't need the taxpayers' money right now because they're going to get it later on. Regardless, they're losing trillions of dollars in tax revenue by not having people working. And another thing to consider is that you'll notice that all countries are kind of opening up around the same time, and every country is starting to talk about it, because everybody wants to get back in the game. This is a global playing field, and to be competitive, you have to be in the game. So when countries went into lockdown, other countries followed, because they said, okay, we don't have to worry about them competing with us. But if you're unlocking your country, then we got to unlock ours. And a lot of these countries, like India and Brazil in particular, are really starting to feel that. I can't even imagine what's going on in the favelas in Brazil right now. It must just be hell. The only thing they have going for them is they have a younger population, which may offset some of the more serious critical complications with the illness. But I can't imagine what those situations are like where they don't have adequate testing. I'm trying to tie all this into the political realm of things, because this really is political, it's economic, it's epidemiological, it's everything. Now, there was this video that went viral with the two doctors in California. I had a whole video prepared to do a rebuttal. I shouldn't say a rebuttal because it wasn't directed towards me, but to debunk that video, because I watched it probably three times, different parts on the third time, just to make sure I was hearing correctly. And it was so ridden with errors that I was astonished, number one, that these medical doctors could make such obvious errors, okay, that anybody could see were untrue. When it comes to interpreting data where there's room for interpretation, that's where your authority comes into play. And just for the record, being a doctor and having anecdotal evidence of seeing people on a daily basis is different from epidemiological research, which takes an aggregate of all of the information and compiles it and looks for trends in the data. It's an entirely different thing. So being a doctor doesn't give you any authority in that particular area. That's one of the things they tried to argue. They tried to say that, well, Dr. Fauci isn't here seeing what we are seeing, but that argument in itself is complete horseshit. And I'm not even a huge fanboy of Fauci. I know there's some controversy and stuff surrounding him right now, and in the past even, but there were so many errors made in this video. And the real tragedy was that even though the information they were putting out was patently false, there was a very high like to dislike ratio. It was like 90% likes. And that's scary to me, because that means that people are walking away thinking what they were saying is true, and it's entirely not true. Now, what they said in a nutshell, these guys work in a clinic and they test people for the bug, okay? So people are sent to them, they test these people. Now, what they found was that they did so many tests, and so many tests had came back positive. Something like, I can't even remember exactly what it was, so this number is not going to be accurate, but let's say it was a 50% infection rate, meaning 50% of the people they tested tested positive for the bug. And then they said, okay, how many fatalities are there in California right now? And so what they did, they said, well, if 50% of the population has the bug based on our one little non-representative, non-randomized sample that we've conducted here, then, you know, the fatality rate must be much lower than the flu, even lower than the flu, I think they said at one point. This, of course, is incredibly stupid. It's like saying, I work in a tattoo parlor. 5 out of 10 people I see every day who come in already have tattoos. Therefore, 50% of California has tattoos. Or here's a better example. Let's say you are an anthropologist and you go to a basketball game to get the average height of people. Obviously, the average height at that basketball game is going to be much higher. And then you say, okay, well, the average height of the United States is 6'5" or something like that. On the basis of that. That's exactly what they did. They didn't have a representative sample that was representative of the population. They were being sent patients by employers who suspected that they might be sick, okay? So there was a higher likelihood that they were going to test positive in the first place. And this is assuming that the tests they're doing aren't giving out false positives. That's another thing. Even if what they were saying was true, okay, that might be a representative sample of that county. You cannot extrapolate that to the state, and you certainly cannot extrapolate that to the country as a whole, which is what they were doing, which is just asinine that you can have medical doctors, and I guess it's a failure of the education system or something, that they were really up there on their high horse and they really thought that they cracked the code. And I assure you, these guys are the laughingstock of many an epidemiologist around the world right now, because they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. I mean, anybody with a rudimentary understanding of statistics should know this, okay? And that wasn't the only thing that they screwed up on. They kept making these erroneous statements about Sweden and Norway, and how Sweden has no social distancing, even though Sweden does have social distancing. And they were comparing the numbers between Norway and Sweden, and I believe the erroneous statement was along the lines of there's no real difference, even though the death rate in Sweden is much higher, in spite of the parity of testing and all that. Anyways, essentially they were trying to say it was no worse than the flu. So let's just break that down real quick. The CDC estimates, and this is just a projection, that between 26,000 and 65,000 people die of the flu every year. Now, only between 3,000 and 15,000 are actually confirmed. Okay, so the rest they just throw in there because they assume that, well, there's probably a lot of things that we don't count. So when you hear this statistic that, you know, the flu's killed more people than COVID, which it hasn't, because number one, we've missed peak season. It's only been 4 months out of the year. We've been in a lockdown this whole time, and COVID has already surpassed Fauci's estimate of 60,000, and it's well on its way to 100,000 within the next few weeks. And the thing is, this bug right now is under a much bigger microscope than the flu ever is. There's a lot of people who never get tested for the flu. I mean, think about it. When you have the flu, do you go get tested for it? Even if you go to the doctor for it, are they testing for it? I don't know. So what this means then is that the actual flu death rate is probably much, much lower. It's not just 0.1. It's probably like 0.001, because you're just looking at the infection rate and how many people of those tested to be infected have actually died. Now, when you look at the infection rate of this bug, it's between 6% to 15%, depending on where you look. Now, one of the best places to look, if you want probably the most accurate data, is Iceland. They've done the most testing per capita, and I believe that their death rate's around 0.7. But again, that's only one population. Everywhere else where the curve has been exceeded seems to struggle a lot more with that. So what I'm saying is that if even 1% of the population, in order to achieve herd immunity, which is 60-70%, you're talking about the deaths of 50 million people. So what does this all mean? At the end of the day, I'm going to post an article in the description. It basically estimates that between 10 to 45 times more lethal than the flu under optimal conditions. That's with a flattened curve, a fully functioning healthcare system, okay? So that's pretty serious. It's not end of the world serious, but if 1% of the people croak as a result of this, pardon my words, I don't mean to demean, the deaths of anybody. I understand if people are watching this, I apologize for that. 50 million people of 5 billion people, which is around 60-70% of the population. 5 billion people, 1% dies from it. That's 50 million deaths. That's a lot of death, okay? 50 million people taken out of the equation. Now, in the grand scheme of things, is it going to put a huge dent in the global population? No. Is it going to lead to Mad Max? No. Are there ways that we can get back to work and work around it? Yes. But to spread this false information. And the funny thing is that whenever these guys were challenged by the reporters in that interview, they would use their authority. They would evoke their authority. They would say, well, we're doctors. We've studied this for so long. We know better than you. Anytime somebody does that, they're full of shit. Because otherwise they would have just responded with the logical response. They wouldn't get all in a fluff and say, we know more than you do. Because that's exactly what they're criticizing the mainstream as doing. Using their little bit of anecdotal evidence, their qualitative data, and on the basis of that, generalizing to the entire population as a whole with just an incredibly stupid sampling bias. It really is borderline medical malpractice. And I think YouTube taking it down probably did them a favor, because when it does come out that what they're saying wasn't right, they're going to potentially be liable for putting people in danger for using their authority, because this is what they did. They tried to use their credentials to encourage people not to social distance, or at least to advocate for people not to social distance. Now, there's a couple other doctors, running around the internet being interviewed, but a lot of the stuff they're saying is just false. Like, one of the things they're trying to say is that you lose immunity by being on lockdown for a couple months, which, I mean, to me, that just seems stupid. You're not going to lose immunity just for being on lockdown for 2 months. What good would being immune to anything be if, you only had it for 2 months and you lost it, So I understand, we live in an overly sanitized, sterile society. Yeah, you should play in the dirt, encourage your kids to play in the dirt to get exposed to some of that bacteria. But a lockdown in itself doesn't mean that you're not necessarily interacting with anybody. They try to use arguments like that. And then the other argument I heard was that masks cause respiratory stress, and that can, increase the chances that you would get sick. And okay, obviously stress is related to, or chronic stress, and even acute stress to some degree, is related to illness. Okay, it's going to exacerbate illness. But to say that you shouldn't wear a mask because it's going to cause you respiratory stress, especially when you're talking about these high-end N95s that have the exhalation valve and all that to make it easier to breathe. I mean, it's just, it's borderline medical malpractice. One of the guys is apparently a former military brigadier, health officer or something like that. And I got to wonder about those guys, if they're being put up by the administration to say this shit. Because the funny thing is that was in line with what they were saying initially, the Surgeon General, and then they doubled back and they said, no, you shouldn't wear masks. Now this guy, I don't even want to say his name, I don't even know who it is. It's just some doctor who's, some leveraging his authority to spew all this bullshit. And that's what it is, straight up. He was the guy who's saying, yeah, we all gotta, and I understand, you need your vitamin D, you got to get outside. Yeah, if you're under chronic stress all the time, you're definitely more susceptible. I don't know if you're more susceptible contracting illness, or if, your body's not going to be able to fight it off as much, but really kind of weak arguments. I mean, obviously, if everybody wore a mask, the virus wouldn't be able to spread, okay? And that's been proven in places like South Korea, where everybody wears masks. It's a much more liberal social distancing policy, and they've basically got it under control again, I believe. I think it might actually be getting out of control. It got out of control again, but now they're getting it under control again. Anyways, guys, the main point of this video was to debunk the low fatality rate claims and the claims saying that, you shouldn't social distance and this is no big deal. Absolute horseshit. This is absolutely a big deal. It's not an end of the world deal. It's not, you need to hide in your house for a year deal, but you need to take it seriously. It's a major health concern, and we're seeing that in the rising numbers. It's going to keep rising. It's going to keep getting worse. So you should definitely be preparing, because let me tell you something. If the economy tanks in the way that it has to tank, and we get hit with the second wave of this, we got hit with the first wave when the economy was better than it ever was before. So it came at a time when everything was just great. This second wave could come at a time where everything royally sucks, where there's already disruptions in the supply chain. The most popular catchphrase in the media nowadays is food shortages. They finally caught on to that. Although I don't think that the food shortages right now, are going to be that long lasting, although there are certain plants shutting down. What it's probably going to amount to is prices going up for certain foods. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be shortages. If you have the money, you'll be able to buy it. But of course, not everybody are going to be able to afford it. So, then you're going to get into more discrepancies in nutrition and diet between the different classes. Taking it seriously doesn't mean letting it keep you up at night. It doesn't mean having anxiety over the issue. It doesn't mean letting it really affect you above and beyond, taking those precautions. Wear your mask if you're going into a crowded place, especially grocery stores. Because if anywhere, that's where it's going to spread. And if it's as aerosolized airborne as they say it is, and I just read a study on a very reputable source, or at least an official mainstream source. The mainstream is finally catching on to all the things that we've been talking about over the last couple months. Everything that we said is going to happen is happening, albeit in some cases more diluted than we expected it would. But in terms of the actual case count, I think that's garbage too, because that thing has just been perfectly flat. And that to me indicates that they're not doing as much testing, because that fatality rate is staying the same in the States anyways. And Canada's fatality rate is higher than the States. So we're doing even less testing. Stay vigilant. Don't get too, strung along in these people who are getting angry with the government and you know, all this stuff. Yeah, I get it. You know, you got to be critical, skeptical of what's going on. But when you get people, you know, who in the past have, you know, said that the world is run by shape-shifting reptiles, when they're getting all this airplay for their cockamamie theories about, you know, how, I don't know, the radio waves, or, you guys know, I don't want to say the word because then the video gets, you know, scooped up and sent somewhere and screened and all this stuff. It probably already will be anyways. You got to choose your battles too. That's another thing. A lot of you guys, you know, you want to try to fight the big grand machine, fight the big grand master plan. But a lot of you don't even know what you're fighting against, you know. I've often, and this is just a little afterthought for you guys, I've often thought that the people who resist the ruling class the most are the ones who would probably do what the ruling class did if they ever got into power, because it's a projection thing, right? Because most people, you know, they don't care about what the elites are doing. And, you know, it's if you look at it psychologically, it's almost like it takes one to know one. It takes a dictator to know a dictator. So a lot of the truther crowd are dictators in waiting, perhaps. I don't know. Just a little afterthought for you. I'm sure I pissed off a lot of people in this video. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate. Going to get a lot of people unsubscribing. But hey, man, this is what freedom and liberty is all about. Talking about this kind of stuff. But the numbers don't add up with what these guys are saying. It's not sound science. You can't use a non-representative sample and then extrapolate, they love to use that word, to the entire population. It's stupid. And right then and there, I knew these guys were full of shit. Because if you don't know that simple little piece of logic, you know, logic is the mathematic of words. There is a math to logic. If you ever, I took a course in symbolic logic, and, you know, you can actually take a sentence and you can break it down mathematically to see if it's true or not. Okay, so you don't need a PhD to do that. You can just do that, you know, by applying some common sense and a little bit of analytical acuity, and you're good to go. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section. Feel free to hate on me, because right now, you know, the economy's tanking, the world's going to hell, and I really don't give a you know what. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.